All right, gentlemen, how we doing?
Let me go.
You ready? Maybe rock. Maybe rock.
Feeling grand.
Oh, my feeling grand, man. Grand.
Yeah,
Just,
yeah,
just try that word today.
Is
yeah,
it?
Prime Minister.
That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Margaret.
Yeah.
I thought that was the Prime Minister there just now. I thought that was the Prime.
Oh, all right.
You man showing up for me, look. You man showing up for me. Oh.
I hope you get the coffee through. I hope you get the
You get me
call.
there. You get me there. You get me there. You get me there. We can come back to that story as so wait. How we doing, everybody? Welcome again to another episode of the living room. It's fantastic to have you with us here again this Sunday afternoon or morning, depending on where you are again or eating. If this is your first time, I'm Andre with my good friends Philip and Mark. And you're here on We Global, and this is our living room where we just invite, ordinary West Indians in and we just have a good Caribbean conversation. So let's get to it. Guys, how are we doing, man? You get me there with that one, Mark?
Doing good. Ordinary West Indians and Mark.
Man,
He elevated.
I'm probably the most ordinary here.
The difference between ordinary and common.
My man is showing the extended vocabulary here. No, from grand, ordinary, common. What's not? But let's explain. Really what did we get to the Carmen?
Well, today I lended my voice to the conversation in Barbados on road safety.
You lended to get back
on the voice of Barbados, brass tacks,
Right. Brass tacks.
And
as the saying goes, I hear you have brass tacks hot today, man.
I ain't sure how it was. But I certainly, I added my voice and shared a couple of thoughts around how I think we can move things forward in Barbados. As you would. Why not?
No.
So yeah, man.
Nice. Good.
That's good. I had a listen.
Time well spent.
I thought so. I thought it was very good. You did a fantastic job. Good to
thank you,
represent.
I didn't know that you were in there. I thought you could have called him, man. What you gonna call him?
No, man, I was just listening and soaking up the knowledge. Soaking the knowledge. I was just soaking up the knowledge. So I thought you did a fantastic job, man. I thought you did a great job.
I thought that was the Prime Minister calling there just now, right? So that's sorry, I didn't realize.
It coming. As the saying goes, many hands make like work. That's the phrase, isn't it? Isn't that the main phrase? Many hands make like work. We must use our best and brightest.
Best and brightest.
Best.
I think that saying came from the electric company.
Mm-hmm. Electric. Ready kilowatt?
So I think you've proven to be in that bracket. You're going to be one of the many hands to rebuild Barbados. So I think you need to go there.
Well, look, let me just say that anytime I get the call, I can tell her, listen, I have two distinguished gentlemen who I am sure wouldn't mind doing some of the heavy lifting.
Of course. Okay. I very much so. Bust the city stop. I will put in some of those.
Bust the city stop.
That's a little inside joke. He's Frank Mark both sometimes. But no, I thought it was good. I thought it was a fantastic show. And I think it's always good. When you learn different things or a different way, or you see a different way of doing things, it's always good if you get the opportunity to to give that advice and that knowledge and put it back into the public at home. So I thought that was fantastic. So well done.
I think we all have a responsibility wherever we go in the world as Caribbean people to make sure that we are keeping our fingers and ears on the pulse of what's happening at home, and where we can make a contribution. That's all we can do. Make a contribution.
I 100% agree with that.
Yeah,
that's what we should be doing.
So there you go.
Well done, buddy.
So that was my Sunday. Moving along.
When you get the call, don't forget me.
I tell you, if I get the call, I can tell you.
Drop my name, man. Drop my name. I all care for that.
What's what you put that for?
Drop my name in there, man. I all for that. I all for that.
I hear you,
so
man.
What else did we get to this weekend, man?
Man, today was a heat wave.
Manchester. What? We up in Manchester? When you say heat wave, what are you talking about?
I think we have about 13 or 14 degrees Celsius today.
You're boiling up there, man.
So
Had to take off one layer.
you went out and took advantage of that, Phil?
I just did a longer run than usual today. That's all.
A longer run than usual, which means what? You went about a little 10K. You went what?
No, usually on a Sunday would do just a quick 5K as well. But I just did probably about 8.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's a little bit late
Wow.
too.
A little run walk, or you run all the way?
You're not abusing you there, Phil, man. Run walk.
You know,
a little run chip, a little
maybe run chip. What? Since I started running, I have never done like a run walk. Honestly, from the first 5K I did, even though it's still slow, I just keep running. That's the idea. Steady.
No.
Steadiness. Focus on your heart rate. Focus on the rhythm. Get to the end.
Listen. Not a problem. Not a problem at all. I always remember when you went running with Mark's son Kyle, you know. I remember you come home. I thought you were gonna die.
Come on, Kyle is what? Almost 30 years my junior.
Kyle runs a 5K in something like 17 minutes or so. This
I didn't get back and show and all kind of thing and
we got back together.
Game, write a song, and that was
we got back together. That was a good run.
Yeah, I think when you get back together, it kind of was like, yeah, we just went for a walk. We just we just got to run.
I think that would be a different story.
No, that's good. I didn't even get for a run today. Yesterday, actually, because I went for a little 5K, a little something.
So you're the run walk, man?
No. We don't run walk, man. I do half marathons and thing, man. No, man. I in the big leagues.
Listen to you. Listen to half marathons, man. You hear you, Phil?
I hear you, man.
I just saying, you know. So, hey, Bernadette. So when you doing your little 8 and thing, you know.
That's what he would say here. Listen, Phil. Listen, that's what he would say here, right?
You know,
but he's not going to say it when California say he's here frothing at the mouth.
The thing is, Mark, remember the last time he was by you? Every day I was going running. I was, Andre, you want to go for a run? And he was like, nah, I won't go for it. Nah, I okay.
I was letting you get in your muzz, man. I was taking a break. I'm okay. Good. That was good. Don't worry about that.
The race is on. It's not for the swift.
Hey, Patrice.
There seems to be some kind of living room battle that might be coming here, you know. So
yeah, man. We can do.
I will bring the whistle.
You should be running.
Running is good for you.
You should be running.
Man,
go ahead, Mark.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was gonna say I see plenty of vaccines and things now all across the region. Everybody jabbing. So that's a good thing.
Well, I think before we get there, we can say what a fantastic piece you did on Before Tonight on Friday night, huh? Well, of course, if you haven't seen that yet, you know, Before Tonight with Andre, one of our new shows here on We Global, check it out. But that piece you did in there on the jobs was fantastic, man. Although I don't know if there'll be some territories in the Caribbean that will be inviting you back, but hey.
Oh, shit.
Well, this is... I think my phone was going off and people started to watch it and go like, oh, you don't have the good St. Kitts, right?
No.
I was like, of course, Timothy Harris will let me in, man. No problem. Be good.
But yeah, I see some people are deciding that they're not going to share, you know. What we have is ours.
All right.
I think.
Okay. I know where you're going.
You won't be going out there by wholeness, will you? Well, it's interesting, right? Because that happened as well right after CARICOM made a statement that said any vaccines coming into the region will be sharing. The day after, Jamaica said, "Oh, by the way, we're getting 50,000, but we're not sharing."
We keep these to ourselves.
For whatever reason, I don't know what the reasons. I'm sure some would say that Jamaica is so big that 50,000 is not going to do much, so they need to keep them all. But I think sometimes as well is the principle of though is what you got to look at. But we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, but it is good to see that vaccines are going in arms, man. That's good. That's good to see. And you know, we got to really make sure the region is properly vaccinated because I want to go home. You know,
man, I'm ready to go home. I am ready to go home. That's the honest truth.
Yeah, man.
Are you ready to go? So we gotta get there. We definitely gotta get.
Yeah, man. But it's really, really good to see. Mm-hmm. Right. So who have we got in the living room today, then, man?
So the living room, we always said we were going to come back to this conversation, and a few times actually on our page, so many people ask us when are we returning to the race conversation so that we can have a broader, wider chat. So we thought,
race. I got nothing to do with running, right?
No.
Well, we got past that.
Yeah, he excited. No, 8K no, and he just got racing. He's like, he excited. So we thought now would be a good time to just have that conversation about race relations in the region, and not what prompted. And we were going to show the video, but we decided not to because it's much wider than some idiot spouting off nonsense. To be honest with you, but there was a bit of a video going around in Barbados where someone was saying some very unsavory things, and that just planted in our heads. We need to come back to this conversation. But again, recognizing that the conversation right around the region is broader and bigger than that, and a lot more nuanced than just someone spouting out some racist nonsense. So today we have from Guyana, Dr. Maxine Paris, and she's joined us for this conversation. We have returning again, Annalie Davis in Barbados. And then we have someone that most of our audience will be used to seeing in the comments, but no, she's going to be in front of the camera. We have Barbadian Ruth Hood, who lives in Canada. So she'll be joining us. Fresh from vacuuming the mattress. We have Ruth. And then we have, our audience favorite, and everyone was soon
watch the chat go mad now.
The chats are going to go crazy. We have Naz from Trinidad.
Oh, Naz is
residing in Antigua.
Hi, Naz.
Is back with us today.
Finally, we can watch Be Global again.
Indeed. We know how that's going to go. But look, everyone who's in the audience, do us a favor. We're going to bring everyone in a second, but hit share. The reason why is that we have conversations. We don't do interviews. And the more people that we can have in a conversation, the better that conversation is. So hit share, invite friends. We're having this conversation right across the region. So do that for us, and we're just going to have a good conversation among friends about race relations in the Caribbean. So let's bring everyone in now.
Yeah, man. Much needed.
There we go. And that's everyone in. Ladies, how are we doing?
Good.
All is well.
All is well. Excellent.
Good.
Fantastic to see everybody.
Welcome, ladies. It is great to have those who are returning to the living room in Naz and Annalie, and new faces. Maxine and Ruth. You heard I said there that you were fresh from vacuuming the mattress, but I'm not going to call any names, Ruth, but one of these fellas phoned me yesterday and said, look, you're not going to believe what my wife here asked me to do.
Well, I'm just here to inspire them.
Of course, I said, you mean that's the best that you can do with the mattress is vacuum it?
Sometimes it's why you have to vacuum the mattress.
Anyhow, I like being the co-host on this show, so I'm not going to say too much more or less. They tell me don't bother to come back, right?
Ruth, go along with that topic.
No, Naz. I've already been censored before we
Listen, it is great to have you all, and we love to bring people here to have conversations about various things. And this topic today is one of those that, Naz, you've been on this road with us before, and we keep saying it is something we'll return to, but here we are again. Race relations across the region. And Annalie, I'm probably going to come to you first to set the scene around how do you see it? How do you see the region as it stands right now in terms of how we get along?
Thanks, everyone. Well, that's a big question because the region is pretty diverse. I mean, I think sometimes it's read externally as a kind of a like a homogenous Afro-Caribbean space, but it's a really complicated and layered space.
Yeah.
I would say at the moment, from my experience in Barbados, I think what happened last year with the Black Lives Matter movement kind of opened up some doors in more kind of sensitive ways than I had seen before, where people seemed willing to have more conversations about race and class in Barbados. And even though it was kind of spurred on by the Black Lives Matter, out of the US, and our situation here is quite different. I think it was really valuable because I kind of feel like, after several hundred years of a traumatic history that the Caribbean has gone through collectively, there wasn't ever like a therapy session, so there's been trauma after trauma after trauma, and I don't think we've dealt with it. I don't think we've dealt with it. So when things happen, like the video you mentioned in the introduction that you decided not to show, it kind of opens up a wound, and it's discussed in maybe unsavory and more kind of intelligent ways, but it suggests to me that there's a lot that hasn't been spoken about. I'd say from the perspective of Barbados, there's what I refer to as a kind of a voluntary social apartheid, where people kind of self-select to engage within their own kind of race and class. Those things I don't think can be divorced from each other. So it's possible that I could go to an event of 300 white Barbadians, or people can go to events that are, mostly Indo-Barbadians or Black Barbadians. And, my thinking about that is that kind of separateness makes our lives much poorer. And I feel that we deserve more than that and better than that. But there's still a lot of fear and anxiety around these conversations, and people feel awkward. So, I mean, that's, I maybe that's just enough as a way to kind of start in. But I would say there's a lot to deal with.
That's a great start. I remember growing up and always hearing, we live together, but we don't mix. But it was said in jest. No one really, you just heard it, but you didn't think about it. But you're absolutely right there on that one. And it's interesting you say that people feel a bit of fear as far as having some of these conversations. And I wanted to go to Maxine. And Maxine, thank you so much for joining us from Guyana. And the reason why I say come to you right after mentioning fear is because, when we were looking for guests from, we wanted to take it broader than just the black-white conversation that generally you might have in Barbados. And we know that there's some special issues or stuff going on in Trinidad as well as Guyana. And nobody from Guyana wanted to come on the show. and for various reasons, they all said, you know what, that particular topic, no. But you did. So I want to say thank you for joining us. And I wonder if, similar to what Mark asked Annalie, what's your view and what do you see in Guyana as a starting point as looking at this discussion?
Okay. I don't see differently from what Annalie sees. There has been for ages, long before me, there has been a sore that is festering in the society. And because we've spoken about it, or we've spoken at it, but we've done nothing to advance correcting it. We have identified there's a problem. We've identified there's several problems, and we say, okay, people need to act differently. But my own feeling is that it's an individual. It starts with an individual attitudinal change. You have to want to think differently about race. You have to want to treat people with a level of respect that they deserve. Because if you recognize that each person, irrespective of race, color, creed, religion, has a role to play, there's a reason why they were even born. And if you can recognize that there is some unique quality that is useful, then we can go on from there. But it has to be a conscious effort. I don't care how many systems we put out in the community, and we try to have cohesive cricket and football and whatever. we can just play that game for 1 hour and then we go our separate ways, still not knowing anything at all. You know, so I think that there is a problem, there is a deep problem, and what has happened globally in other countries, unfortunately, it has caused us to think, but it has also in some cases deepened the wounds. And I think what we have done as individuals is hand over our responsibility to other people, to leaders, to whoever. We make them responsible for creating an environment in which we can exist. We need to create that environment.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, somebody buying ice cream?
Sunday afternoon.
Sunday afternoon.
Sorry.
It is the living room after all.
You know, I was just wondering, I wanted to follow up on something Andy said, but I wanted to ask Ruth about that. The idea of voluntary social apartheid. That's quite an interesting way of framing the situation across the Caribbean. How would you say that, Ruth? Do you agree with that as a sort of framework for defining the way we live and share our space?
Oh, absolutely. I would agree with Annalie. I think what happens is that almost from childhood, you're separated into these categories, and then at some point in your adult life, you make a conscious or quasi unconscious decision to continue on, to not seek out people who think or look differently than you do. And sure, that's a huge part of growing up for me, definitely. And that's why I try really hard to make sure that it doesn't go that way for the next generation.
Yeah,
it's a time that we need to be speaking about these things and stop just kind of hiding them under the cocktail table. And it's I hope we're ripe for change. But I do think that what Annalie says is correct, that we do tend to be like, when you go to the high school dance and all the guys, all the girls over there. And to further go to what Maxine said, we come together for certain activities, but then we leave and separate and go to our own comfort zones.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. No, that's really insightful, and the way that you speak to it there, Ruth. Let me just bring Naz in, because we talk about the conscious effort at the individual level that Maxine spoke about there, Naz, and I know you've been speaking very passionately about this, and you have done in our previous show. How do you frame it in this conversation today?
As a Trinidadian, we tend to think that Trinidad is probably the most cosmopolitan territory in the region, in CARICOM, because of all the various races. Something for me, as coming from Trinidad and living in Antigua, is a little bit of a shock, in the sense that I can tell you about Hinduism, I can tell you about Christianity, I can tell you about Shouter Baptist, spiritual Baptist people. I can know that Guyana recently celebrated Mashramani last week. They had a holiday for it, right? And this is not just a racial thing, but it's a cultural thing that we have in the Caribbean, that we tend to be insular. So what Maxine was saying, it comes from a personal level. It also comes from a national level, because we tend to clump each other off, block each other off, and be just insulated to ourselves. And as somebody who grew up in Trinidad, I think last year probably was the most in-your-face example of racial tensions in Trinidad, because everybody in Trinidad jumped up together in February for Carnival. And August, when we had elections, it was one of the dirtiest elections in terms of racial politics and racial tensions that I've seen in Trinidad in all my years of acknowledging election times in Trinidad. And as Maxine said, it's something that we as individuals have to do, because the state can't make us be any less racist as a policy, right? And it's something that people maybe, the generation or two before me, and now my generation and the generation coming behind myself, it's been less than what it was previously, but I think we have a long, long way to go before we can even say, okay, we don't have that issue here in the Caribbean, despite having similar histories, similar socio-political statuses in the Caribbean. But race is something that has been swept under the carpet for too long, and I think it's something that we need to identify and bring it out, and try to make that change. And Trinidad last year was the prime example of that.
But I keep saying to everyone all the time that, even though I knew obviously Trinidad's issue, so to speak, last year was the first time that it really hit home to me how serious the issue was. And it's funny you say that it was probably the worst year, because I was putting it down to finally working from home, having time, starting to be global and doing this, that I was finally paying attention to things across the region. Maybe it was always there. But it's interesting to hear you say that it was very heightened last year with last year's elections. And I was wondering, why do you think that was? Why do you think last year was so different?
Social media.
Okay.
Social media is where you saw everything.
So you think social media worked as a magnifying glass to an issue that was always there?
Of course. You remember last year when COVID started and you all started the living room, we had a discussion about digital economy in the Caribbean and using technology and using online platforms to grow and to come together as one and to change how the focus we have as Caribbean people and where we to move away from tourism and economy and stuff like that. And then now this is the downside to all of that, right? Because I will tell you, as an Indo-Trinidadian, not to say that my family does it, but I have heard other people do it, right? I mean, if you go to school with other Indo-Trinidadians, or sometimes you might go to a function or whatever it is, and you come in contact with those people, you would hear racial comments, right? Or they might make little snide remarks, and it's a racial undertone that they have with it, right? And a lot of families in Trinidad, and this goes both ways of the pendulum, right? That there would be Afro-Trinidadians who might probably make a comment against Indo-Trinidadians, right? But the thing about it is that now the generation, probably my generation and the younger ones, they think they need to post everything on social media. So you might post a Facebook status, you might post a tweet, you might post something on your Instagram or whatever it is, right? And me, as somebody who works as a media officer, I can tell you that you see everything, right? So sometimes they might not think that what they're doing is wrong because that is what they're accustomed to at home and within their circle, whether it's within their circle of families, within their circle of friends, or whatever it is. But that has been the conversation from time immemorial, where that's probably how they heard their grandparents speak, their parents speak, siblings speak, cousins, aunts, uncles, whoever it is. But it's just one might choose to post online, and that is where the explosion of everything happened. So you see in black and white or whatever color they choose to post their writing in online, you actually see it. And then you'll be like, oh my gosh, but those are my friends. So like maybe an Afro-Trinidadian would have been reading that and be like, this is what you have in your mind about me all the time and I didn't know. And
Wow.
If I could address that, I think I think that it's that fine line that we walk between wanting some of this to be exposed, seen through the magnifying glass, only because it generates conversation. It brings us to where we are in this panel today. But I know that there are a lot of people, as Anna was saying, who are not just uncomfortable, almost fearful to have this conversation, because looking in the mirror and addressing some of their thoughts, some of their generational DNA that includes racism or classism is extremely difficult to do. On a personal level, I have to tell you, and I told you guys, I say this has been a very personal journey for me. I'm not, I don't have a lot of qualifications. I'm not an activist, but but it has been very interesting to me. I've gone to sleep nights or not slept, crying, thrashing, trying to work this out. And I give my children some credit because they don't let up. Like, they say whatever they say whatever they have to say to me, and they don't mince words. And they keep us on track. And I'm so glad for that next generation that wants to do that. But I do think there is some benefit to people just coming out and saying whatever they want to say, because it helps us to understand, it helps us to really see what people are thinking and what is going on in society. And then that's where the work comes. We now need to address why that
you can only
happening.
deal with the issue once light is shown on it,
Yeah.
So that's what you're saying.
So one of the terms that seems to be coming up there quite often is class as well, and there seems to be this conflation of race and class constantly. And there's a statement that, and then as you also talked about state and the role of the state and so on. And Walter Rodney made this statement once that the state arose as an instrument to be used by a particular class to control the rest of society as well. So what then is, so we have state, class, and race. How do we navigate those three things? What is it that is the single thread that helps us to address those three things?
I mean, I wanted to just sort of speak towards outside of the personal level, that we also need to look at the fact that the history of racism is also running concurrently to that of capitalism. And so we're also looking at economic systems that were developed through the plantation as an economic model, for example, that Barbados and the Caribbean was based on, which was really designed around inequality and injustices. And so there's no surprise that we're here, that this is where we're at. But I think it's also understanding that it's this larger system. And even though for the countries that became independent and we shifted, well, in the case of Barbados, to a Black government, it doesn't mean that they embodied the most progressive policies. You know, in a lot of ways, there was a repetition of these notions of legitimacy and illegitimacy, hierarchies, who belonged, who didn't. It wasn't like there was a really radical shift in terms of thinking about taking that as an opportunity to develop new societies that envisioned empowering our people and understanding our history in a different way. And I think that has become very apparent under COVID, to see that, you know, we're still importing over 90% of our food. There's still a lot of dependence elsewhere. So I think we need to look at these larger structural, economic and historical structures that have led to this kind of inequality, because it's about resources and access. So class is very much wrapped up in all of this.
Yeah, I agree with Annalie. And until we actually level the playing field in a lot of situations, economically, etc., if people continue to feel disenfranchised, then they have no reason to come to the table and do anything differently. And what has happened is that the system, whether it be business or social activities or whatever, the playing field is still tipped depending on who is in power. And because race and politics is so tied in the Caribbean in many of our countries, then we continue to have that problem, and we continue to not be able to trust each other, not be able to do those things. I mean, I would like to know that I didn't get a particular job because there was somebody more effective than I am. It's not because I was Black or Indian or Portuguese or Chinese. And those, somehow they're not, the systems are not in place to ensure that we have that balance. And that we continue to regard each person not by class, not by political affiliation or race, but just for who they are and what they possess and what they can bring to the entire situation.
Funny enough that Maxine should talk about that, right? I mean, like, as I say, in Trinidad, we grew up with various races around each other. So I would go to school with my secondary school had no white people, if you want to call it that, because I went to a government secondary. So it was mainly Afro Trinidadians and Indo Trinidadians, right? But for me, like, as an Indo Trinidadian, until this day, like, I can't see race, right? Because you're my friend. I don't care. You can have horns growing out your forehead. That don't bother me because you're my friend. I remember the first time I went to Guyana, one of my really good friends, he was my colleague here in Trinidad, and he moved back to Guyana. And he took me to Georgetown to see the market and stuff like that, right? And we were walking. Obviously, I'm Indo-Trinidadian wearing a hijab, and he's Afro-Guyanese. And I'm not kidding you, for probably 30 minutes that we went on, everybody stared at us, and he was like, just walk along and mind your business, because that's just how people are here. They don't see a Indian and a black person walking down the road normal together. So for me to still experience that living in the Caribbean was a little bit of a shock.
Wow.
Maxine,
but those things have changed quite a bit. I mean, I don't know how long this was, but there's a lot of mixed marriages. But however, our psyche hasn't changed. Yeah, we live in the same house, whatever. And yes, I like, like my wife and my wife's family, but outside of my wife and her family, or her husband and his family, I don't trust the other people. So there's still, we will be walking down the street, and we will work in the same office and whatever, but the trust, we haven't built the trust, because there's still so much suspicion. We have decided that this race is only good for this thing, and this other race can only achieve this. And then outside of that, a progressive person in a particular race then becomes so much of a threat that, it is almost impossible to form a bond with that person. And then, like I said, the whole politics that it has taken through us all these years have not deviated a whole lot from creating that situation. I mean, why do we still have a lot of villages that are almost 80% one race? And and these things, I mean, I saw a statement below that somebody said in the 50s and the 60s they didn't have that problem. The only reason they didn't appear to have those problems is because there wasn't social media. And there weren't everybody walking around clicking cameras and taking
and back
pictures.
then too, people kind of knew their place.
Yeah.
Yes. And then, you knew that you had a particular place, so you just held that space and you kept it, and you look. We still don't know. It just comes back to us individually. We still don't know enough about the other person. I mean, only the other day, my daughter was trying to educate me as much as this brain can take in right now about the difference between a hijab and the other headdresses and whatever. And I'm there going, oh. I mean, I wish some of this was said before. And then we have something that we did in school, in school, even way back then, and it continues now, where on all these holidays, we, Indian holidays, everybody dress up in the clothes and all the offices, and everybody try to decorate it. I would like to see that go beyond just that holiday. Where we eat and we play dress up. We need to do that all the time. We need to consider that all the time when we're making policies, when we're setting systems in place, whatever. It has to be that it's every day that we do that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, there's a lot of effort that is going to be needed in every corner of society to be able to move us along. And I think the comment I was going to make really to Annalie was, as we, I don't often have a conversation with a white person from Barbados. Okay, and we I think it was Naz who No. I'm just being honest. You know, if we personalize some of this, is not started too earlier.
Well, that's where I was going to get to, but go ahead. Yeah. You go ahead. Yeah.
I went to school with one white guy, Robert Blackman, who was in my class. And for all of my life growing up in Barbados, Robert was the only white person that I ever interacted with. But once school was finished, that was it. Right? And what I wanted to understand was, when you look through the lens of the society, you know, I've heard you said before about these silos that we tend to operate within. What is the effort that is required on both sides to move us along? How can we move along?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we need to believe that we're not fixed by our history, right? And that it's possible that we can move forward. And that's one of the reasons I work in the arts, because I feel that the arts gives us the opportunity to imagine something differently.
That's powerful. Yeah.
I think we need to make decisions in our life to, I mean, I grew up in a privileged background. My social milieu was white.
Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I went to an all-white primary school. I then, at 11, I went to foundation, where that was the first time that I was experiencing being a minority in my country, because socially, at home, in my family, I was raised as a white person. I was raised to think I was white. I then understood in my 20s that wasn't actually the case, but those are things we don't talk about. And then when I, primary school was pretty much a white bubble. All the teachers were white, the students were white. It was very small. I went to foundation for a year, and I was one of 2 white children in a class of about 32 students.
For a year?
Only for a year, because my mom then transferred me to the Ursuline convent. Okay. And that was a mix of probably, I guess, about 60-40%, maybe 60% white, 40% Black students. And outside of the school situation, there wasn't a lot of social mixing. And, I was kind of curious. I was raised on a plantation. My father was a planter. And as a young child, I was curious about, why is it that the people that work on the estate and live in the village are Black, and why is that the case? And I was young. I didn't have a language to describe that. It wasn't something that we spoke about at the dinner table. And I think that we lack a language, because I think race is about relationships, and unless you can really have relationships with people, Absolutely. It's hard to understand. And it wasn't until I went away to high school for 2 years in Canada, where there were a lot of Caribbean students. Very few were white. But I actually began to feel more Caribbean and more connected in a way that I didn't feel in Barbados. I felt quite marginalized in Barbados. And as I became older, I began to understand that, how could I be expected to receive everything I needed from 8,000 people? Why should I be expected to function within an enclave of white Barbadian people? And there weren't conversations about race happening within my social environment. And then I chose to be in the arts and being in culture. Barbados and I grew up together. I was 3 when we became independent. And that was important culturally, because it was beginning to identify itself as a Black nation. And so here's a white woman coming into a cultural sector, and that was challenging. I had to find a way to work within that. But I think we need to make choices to function outside of our comfort zones and to explore that. And then, of course, becoming older and choosing, I then married somebody outside of my country and my race, and was exposed to an Indo-Trinidadian life, and realized how impoverished our lives are if we live in these silos. And I was,
absolutely,
I came across Jean Rhys's Wide Sargasso Sea, and there's a moment in the book where she writes about looking out of her window and wanting to be part of this larger this larger social milieu. And, you know, I think, you know, I've made very different choices as an adult, as the kind of social spaces that I engage in, the work that I do, the way that I raise my children, because my children are, you know, they have a white Creole Anglican background mother, and they have an Irish Catholic Hindu East Indian father. So they're corporeal beings, embody this larger Caribbean reality that we need to come to terms with and celebrate and speak about in all of its awkwardness and all of its potential.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's interesting how you said your purview trying to change when you left Barbados and went to Canada. And I'll come back on that one of going the other way and an experience I had in Barbados as well a while ago. But Ruth, did you find that a similar thing happened for you as well?
Intensely. Absolutely intensely. It was, well, a little bit of my background. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. My parents divorced when I was 8, which in and of itself in 1969 or 70 was quite unusual. But my father gained custody of us. And so when it was determined that we should move to Canada, my mother had emigrated there, and for familial reasons, we went with her. I moved into, well, at that time I was at Queen's College. We had about 500 students at the school. And that was the big school, you know. And I moved into the largest secondary school in Western Canada with 3,000 students. My initial experience was literally sitting on the grass because you were allowed to wander away, which was another thing that was very strange to me. You know, we were kept at our school behind a wall or a gate or whatever. But at lunchtime, you could wander off and go to a restaurant or shopping or do whatever. And I would literally sit on the grass and cry because I had no way to connect with these people. And so eventually, all of the Caribbean people find the Caribbean people because tribe, right? And I do remember my Uncle Richard writing years ago in the newspaper about a similar experience when he went to Trinidad to UE, that, you know, that was the first time he integrated with other Caribbean people because you are looking for people with similarities. And I was the only white person in this group of Caribbean people. And it was a very interesting opening for me. And yet, times when the strata was still underscored. So, for instance, I had my best friend was a Black Jamaican girl, loved her dad. He was like one of those jovial, happy people. And I would often be at their house. I was totally accepted. You know, we only lived blocks apart. She never came to my house. I didn't invite her, and she didn't ask to come. And it was just that, you know, that's one of the progressions that I've talked about before in this personal journey for me, was sat back and realized that they completely embraced me. That was okay for me to go there, but there was something in my psyche that told me it was not okay for her to come to my house, to sit on our couch, lay in our bed, do all the things that I used to do at her house. And yet I recognize my Caribbean identity group of people. So yeah, absolutely, very similar thing. And I think that was when I started to, you know, open and realize. But if I may just shift sideways for a minute, I noticed there's a lot of comments being made about something that Naz said about not seeing color.
I was going to come back to that. Yes.
You mind if I speak to that,
go ahead.
Andre?
No, go ahead.
Yeah.
So I think that is one of the major things that I have learned over this last year as I've explored more, was the thing of not seeing color. And I'm certainly absolutely guilty of uttering those same words. Oh, I don't see color. My kids don't see color. They weren't raised like that. And I think what I learned is it's not a matter of not seeing color. It's a matter of seeing color and celebrating
the color
and the differences. And I know that's not where Naz was going, but
correct.
I knew too.
And I do remember an incident with my son. He was very close to our pastor's son. And something happened one day, and he said something about Black people, and I said to him, "But your best friend is Black," and he just looked at me and he said, "No." And I said, well, yeah, Ted, he's Black. And he said, no, Black is like, those people outside the supermarket or the post office, like in the village. That's like, my friend is not Black. And it was, I hadn't taught him that. That's something that came from the society and the community that we started off this conversation, where it's so ingrained. There's so much complexity to this understanding of what is race,
Correct.
what are racial relations, and what is racism.
There's so much. There's really so much to reflect on there.
Wow.
Go ahead, Phil.
I was just gonna say something to Trent. I don't know where to pick up. I'll go with this one. So when Naz talked about not seeing color, I thought about my relationship with. I have two very good Indo-Barbadian friends. We went to Combermere School up and on together, right? And we used to play the same sports. We used to make the same jokes. We used to get sent out the classroom together, all sorts of things. And it's only as we got older that I started to recognize it. Fanny is actually very Indian. I never recognized it. And it's just the other day we were having a conversation. He's also in the UK now he's a doctor in the UK. We were having this conversation and he was talking about when his dad left India. And I was like, of course, your parents actually left. And a lot of that heritage just was not in my perception as we were at school together, having fun and playing sports. And he speaks with a very Bajan accent, unless he's making fun at his dad, then he switches to an Indian accent. But I think that's the nature of when people say colorblindness. Sometimes what they mean is that color tends to be what I call a shallow affinity, a thing on the surface that we see. But if you really see a person, it actually goes a bit deeper. It goes deeper than color. And that experience when you leave the Caribbean, sometimes I remember another experience. I was traveling with work, and one of my colleagues said, "Oh, I just met another person who sounds a lot like you, and they say they're from Barbados, but I'm not sure." And I said, "What do you mean you're not sure? If they sound like me, they're probably from Barbados." And she said, "Well, they're a white person." And I was like, "Yes, they are. There are white people in Barbados." Well. Yes. And I was just interested, because I met up with the young lady, and we had a good chat, and it was great, to just connect with another Bajan out there as well.
I think the example that I was really trying to say is that I think the Indo-Trinidadians that were in my class expected me to be grouped with them, right? And I look beyond that because I had commonalities with my other friends, and I felt closer with my other friends, and I gravitated towards them. I think maybe I worded it wrong before, and I'm sorry if I did. But I think what the whole thing was that there was an expectation that I would just stick with the Indo-Trinidadians and not have friends outside of my race, or be as good friends with people outside of my race as was expected to by my classmates.
Yeah.
So Naz, I just ask Naz a question. Sorry, Maxine. I'm just asking a quick question. So that being the circumstance, were you rejected a little bit by your Indo-Caribbean friends since you chose?
I wouldn't say rejected, but they would always be like, "Oh," they would drop little comments and be like, "Oh, you never come line with us. You're always with your other friends," and they would emphasize the word friends, and I'm like, "But they're my friends. Yeah, they're my friends, right?" I said, and if you are to question me because I'm friends with them, it means you're not really my friend, but you're looking for something else to be friends because of,
yes,
right?
Because
and
you're
not exactly. Exactly.
Sorry, Maxine.
Maxine, you wanted to
And
jump
I
in
will
there?
no.
Oh, so
Let
go
I
ahead.
will tell you, last year for the elections, when all this racial thing blew up in Trinidad, I actually cut ties with a lot of Indo-Trinidadian friends because of the comments that they made. I said, we cannot progress as a people if this is how you all are still thinking in 2020.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I mean, people that I've been friends with for 10 plus years. And I said, I will dialogue with you, I will communicate with you. If it means that we need to get away from where you are right now, call me and we will talk. But if it is that you are not willing to talk about what change needs to happen, and this is your mindset, I wish you the best. And I have no ill will and hard feelings towards you, but we can't continue being friends.
Bridget there.
Wow.
And Maxine,
Yeah.
you wanted to jump in?
Yeah. Listening to Naz and Ruth talk about experiences, etc. I grew up in the country area of Guyana, like 12 miles outside the city. And it is predominantly still a Black village. But there were students that came in from the neighboring villages to go to school and stuff. And we had a really good time. And every time that it was close to elections is when everything went haywire. Otherwise, every other day you had a good time. They brought their food and you'd sit there and you learn to eat with your hands and you learn to eat from a leaf and it was all good. Come election time, everything blew up. But honestly, the last election was the worst for me. I've been depressed, I've cried, because I couldn't understand so much hate.
Wow.
And then I realized that it had been festering for a while, and all we needed was a push, something to really bring it out. And I'm thinking that while it's out there, we need to really attack it and do what is necessary,
And
which
have the
is not only the
conversations.
conversation, but we need to act. We need to act. We need to ensure that in the conversation, people are free to talk because people are hurt. You've had different experiences. Ruth has had an experience. Annalie has had, and Nassa's had experiences. And when people don't talk about these experiences, they internalize them and they then start to generalize. So we need to give people the space to honestly talk about it because it's not necessary. I remember there was an assignment that was given. It was during election, and one of my colleagues made a comment. That's a couple of years ago. Made a comment that Black people are somewhere and they need to just shoot them. When that was brought to my boss's attention, an assignment was given. Write about the contribution of Black people to Guyana. And basically, so that you will understand why it is not necessary to say that. And I figure if I had said something like that about an Indo-Guyanese, my boss would have made me write the same thing. The idea was to get them to see things differently. And so the young lady, still, it didn't register. She went and got some newspaper cuttings and just paste them on a page and hand them in. And the boss said, I want you to write me. And I said, I don't want newspaper clippings. I want your thoughts because I want to see how much you understand. And, if things like these happen in which people are kind of forced to think outside the box and think about individuals, not as race, you realize now if something happens, I don't know if it happens in Trinidad or any other country, but if something happens, something really bad happens, like somebody got raped, what's the first question people would ask? Was it a Black man or an Indian man that raped the person? And is it an Indian man or a Black man, a Black woman that was raped? Why? Somebody was raped and somebody did the raping. It really doesn't matter who did it. What needs to happen now is you need to fix that. But because we are so focused on trying to describe people according to race and bracket them, so if this particular bad thing happened, it could only be this race that did it. If this particular good thing happened, and looking at it at Black History Month and stuff, can't solve the problem. You know, it cannot solve the problem. It has to be not only the conversation, the way in which we bring children up. I didn't expect my first former to come home, my first form daughter to come home and say to me, and this is how she started the conversation. And I wondered why, because that conversation didn't happen at home. And she said to me, Mom, my Indian teacher gave my Indian classmate more marks than me. And she started to describe why. And so I said to her, so what do you think happened there? She said, I don't know. But, you know, I did my work like this. I said, well, this is what you need to do. You need to take your work and you need to say to Miss, I've spent so much time doing this work. And I am not sure why I only got this grade. I said, you're not to mention your friend's grade. They are the classmates' grade. You just tell her you spent all this time. And she hasn't put a red mark on your paper, so that you have nothing to go by to understand why you did the wrong thing, and see what she says to you. And she took that and she went to the teacher. I said, don't forget, you're not comparing your grade with that classmate's grade. You're talking about your grade. You want a better grade for what you did. And she went to the teacher, and the teacher just looked at her, changed the grade, and gave her 10 out of 10 with no explanation. So I said, okay, go to Miss again and tell her that you want to know what she was thinking when she put 8. Maybe she, let her tell you that she was tired or something. Ask her. And the teacher didn't have an explanation. She just said, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. And so these things, I could have said to her, oh, your teacher, and start to, and that's sometimes what we do. We start to negatively talk to these children. And so there is an 11-year-old and 12-year-old running around thinking that all the Indians are bad people or all the Chinese are bad people and whatever. So we need to, as we talk to our children, we need to ensure that they understand there's an importance for everybody around. There's a reason. There's a reason for their existence.
Completely agree. Two points there. A comment and a question. One, regarding the politics of it all. I actually think our politicians are even worse than the racists that we can see in front of us. Because in my opinion, if you're willing to exploit it, then you know that something exists. You're vying to lead the country and you're using it. So which means you actually have no interest in bringing the country together and to solve the issues that we have. So I think that's a real major thing. So for me, I can't go with any politician that use that as a way of trying to get into power. The second thing is, you mentioned communication, and that was really important. And Annalie, I know you're doing a lot or trying to do a lot regarding the communication side of things. But as we're in the living room too, we like to get real, and sometimes we ask some very pointed questions. So my question is this, and thinking about Barbados. What are the racial conversations that are happening amongst the white population in Barbados? And are they happening, or is it perceived it has nothing to do with them because they're in a quote unquote privileged situation? Leave them to discuss it. We're good. Is something are there something happening?
I mean, I wanted to do about 6 years ago. I did a project called White Creole Conversations in an effort to understand, because I'm interested in whiteness and how it behaves, how white Caribbean people see themselves within this kind of larger society. And then I wanted to be able to expand that to include a larger group of people. So last year, as part of this whole kind of Black Lives Matter moment, I worked with Janelle Headley, who is a Black Barbadian woman who runs a theater school called Operation Triple Threat. And we collaborated on delivering a project called Lewy Talk, Real Conversations on Race and Class in Barbados. And it was harder to get white and Indo-Barbadians to sign up. So it was a small group because it was COVID of about 40 people that came in to OTT, and people would find their name on a chair and they would sit opposite a stranger of a different race. And they were given a series of questions to kind of engage in dialogue with this strange person. You know, how have the forces of race and class shaped your life? Or, you know, when was the first time that you were aware of the color of your skin? And there was some interesting feedback. A young white woman who's working in law, so is educated, went through UE, spoke about how she was able to reflect on the experience with another young woman, and that the way she spoke was not how she thought she was. The way that she heard herself speaking was not the kind of person she thought she was. And she realized that she had only ever had conversations, limited conversations about race within her small white group. Now, I don't remember growing up hearing people talk about race, but I understood a lot of things through osmosis. I understood that people had different places in society. I understood that we lived separate lives. And I also understood an obsession with purity and white supremacy. I didn't have a language for any of this stuff, but that's what this is about, right? It's about purity. So when Naz is engaging with Black Trinidadians and her Indo-Trinidadian friends are questioning it, I think it's when some of us move out of the way we are expected to behave that makes other people uncomfortable. But I find it strange that people will grow up in a small place like Barbados and not question that their entire social life remains within a small white social milieu. I find that, you know, it's easier for Black Barbadians to do that because they're 95% of the population. It's harder for white Barbadians and Indo-Barbadians to do that because we're 2% of the population. So I think at some level, I don't even know if people realize that they've made a choice, that they are looking around and not even realizing that they have made a choice to not engage. Because how can you not, right? And then there's that shift into secondary school. My children went to private school. I chose a school for them in part because it was the most racially integrated school, St. Gabriel's School. And they were within a very diverse, a very middle-class school, but a very diverse racially school with a small kind of expatriate population. And then when they shifted to secondary school, that they and their friends, most of whom were not white, were read as white in the state secondary school system because of the way they spoke, because they were middle class. And there also was, I mean, like one of my children was exposed, I would say to, bigoted or prejudiced behavior in a secondary school where she was seen as white. She was called white thing. There were difficult moments that she had to navigate. And I said, you need to realize that you're going to school with children, many of whom have only been in a primary school with Black children, and they haven't been around people that look differently to that. And you all need to figure out how you are going to form relationships with one another, because this is the country we live in. We need to form relationships with one another, and you need to find things in common, and we're human beings and we need to figure this stuff out. But there was fear when people came into that Lewy Talk program. You could have heard a pin drop. There was a lot of anticipation and a lot of fear. And that was interesting to me because it suggested that we don't know how to have these conversations and we feel very tense about it. And people haven't been exposed to difference enough.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
Wow.
That's really interesting.
Can we? And I was going to ask Ruth if she can share a similar experience, actually.
For sure, absolutely. I almost was almost crying when Annalie was talking because I feel a great sadness and pain for white people, especially, and I want to put this only white, who are so fearful that they actually cannot, and I mean cannot, open their minds to understand their place. Place is the best word I can come up with, and I'm not happy with that word, but because it is so much you have to face. Say to yourself, I hold these beliefs, whether I chose to hold them or they came to me through the way it was brought up. Like, I mean, personally, I, like Annalie, was brought up on a plantation. And I was thinking this morning before we came on, I was like, when I was growing up, did I know anybody, any Black people who were not subservient? Because we lived out in the country, which is where plantations are, and I went to school further closer to town, there was actually a man who was my chauffeur to take me to school, elementary school, 5 years old. I often think of that man, and I have to think what that must have been like for him, that's part of his job. He has no choice in the matter. When my grandfather said, to take her to school today, you drive her, like, that just, it makes me start to be upset, because I can imagine, like, how almost, not that your work should be degrading, but that a 5-year-old gets to tell you, like, where to go and what to do, and you have to listen. And there's a lot in what Annalie just said, but I do think I've had conversations like Naz talked about having to separate herself from friends. I have a friend for 30-something years that's speaking to me. I have family members that not just, snooze me for 30, actually blocked me on social media.
Wow.
I have another one who called me a bully, and others backed her up. Because I chose to say openly, I am a racist. I was raised in a racist society. I was raised with racist thoughts, and I heard words, as Annalie said, you hear conversations growing up, but you don't know how to frame, you don't have the language or the capacity to frame the stuff inside of you that is boiling up and that really makes you upset about this. And it's over the progression of my life and my experiences, like the one I talked about in high school, where you come to understand that, this is part of you, and you need to address it and you need to deal with it. And I think that's the hard part. I loved when I saw Annalie have that Levy Talk, is that right, Annalie? Program. But I do notice that the people that chose to walk that difficult path are the people I would have expected to choose to walk that path. And there are others who refuse, absolutely can't. Could you imagine just looking at yourself and realizing that you hold something that you have to recognize is a hurtful belief, and yet that's so much a part of you that people can't. And then I think there's so much nuance. Like, we started off with, we're not going to play the video. I'm very happy I didn't have to watch the video again. But the reactions to the video reactions to the video, which I'm sure everybody's seen. And
it's on the Global Facebook page if anyone wants to see it. It's
right
there. It's
and
been there
and and I do think there's a huge amount of layers of complexity here, because I know people who every day would do, white people who would all but lay down their life for their Black friends, and yet do not understand that the beliefs that they hold could be considered racist.
It's interesting, right? So let me share an experience with you years ago. Well, not that many years ago, Only a few gray hairs.
Yeah.
So years ago, I was working as a project manager in the early days of my career on the Sandy Lane project when they demolished it and built it back. And just fresh from the UK, back from the UK and stuff, and working on this project. I mean, Sandy Lane project had people from all over the world there working on this project, and a lot of guys from the UK as well, because just a lot of guys from the UK. So one afternoon, a Geordie fella from Newcastle came.
Hey, my husband's a Geordie. Be careful.
He's a Geordie. Good people up north. Good people up north.
Change the story quick.
Let Northerners.
Yeah. Well, this back in the day when the Geordies almost had a football team. And me being a Tottenham supporter, we would always have a lot of conversation and that kind of stuff. But he came to me one afternoon and he said, Andre, can I talk to you a minute? And I was like, yeah. He said, let's go outside. And he said, he looked around a little bit and he just went, can you tell me what are the issues are here in Barbados? He's a white guy from the, I use the phrase ordinary. He was an ordinary young fella and stuff. He said he just don't understand what's happening, and this is how he explained it to me. He said every Friday we get the drinks truck come in for the guys to get a beer and stuff, and that's for everybody. Open the back, everyone comes up. Everybody, all the workers and stuff come up and have a beer. He said, but there's also on Saturday afternoons. There's also a party for all the guys who work here, and it's held at one of the white Bajans' house. I've never seen, and he called a few names and all these guys. Why aren't they there? Why don't they come? He said he thought it was just a thing oversight the first couple of times, but he was now there for a few months and this has been going on. I just had to shake and I said, listen, if I explain to you, I can't. And we just had a conversation, but he saw it. And this is a guy, north of England. And he was like, what's the issue? He went to Newcastle University, grew up with a lot of black people, mixed race people, Indians, all kind of stuff. And he just could not understand I think for him, it was about how blatant and obvious it was, but nobody had an issue with it. He did comment and say to me though, his wife loved it. Because his wife would be at all kinds of stuff during the day while he's working in certain circles, going out for the coffees and the brunches and what's not. But she loved it. But he had a problem with it. He was like, what is going on? And that was the extent, of how blatant it is to people coming in to it in Barbados as well. So people talk about it. But I don't know if he eventually assimilated, because I don't think we ever spoke about it after that. And then he went back at the time he went back to Newcastle and that kind of stuff. So that's how real it is, even for people coming from the outside when they see it and what's happening in Barbados, But no one's talking about it. So that's why I wanted to know, where are these conversations happening? Because very often I think the race conversation seems to be, I'll be honest, from what I see, always happening
social media.
It's not so social media, I mean, even people. It always feels as if it's black people talking about race or racial issues. And even here in the UK, same issue. You don't see many other people talking about it other than when you see a Black Lives Matter march. Well, until last year, really. I think that's when it changed. But by and large, so that's why I wanted to know about conversations and who's having them, where they're having them, and actually what they're saying.
I will tell you this. Don't know. Speaking. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, just speaking from my experience, right? I mean, like in all religion, one of the tenets is a Muslim is a Muslim regardless of whatever race they belong to, right? So, Andre, you could be a Muslim, you'll be my Muslim brother. You're Afro-Bajan, right? I'm Indo-Trinidadian. For me, the fact that we're Muslims, you're my brother, I'm your sister, right? And it boggled my mind from ever since I can probably think logically for myself, how people still have a separation when it comes to racism, right? Because I know several people, Indo-Trinidadian people, that didn't allow their son or their daughter to get married to somebody from an Afro-Trinidadian background, even though they're Muslim, but because of their race. And I'm like, you all purport to be Muslims, right? And your religion tells you that you're not supposed to look at this. And you want to condemn somebody else because you might see another Muslim woman that isn't wearing the hijab, but because your daughter is wearing the hijab, your daughter is better than that Muslim, that other young lady. But you're not looking at the fact that you're denying your daughter from marrying somebody that she wants to get married to because of their race. So does that not make you a hypocrite in the situation? Right? And these are the little things where I think as a society, it needs to start within the family, because you need to teach, especially now, the conversation has to start at home. How you teach your kids, because if we don't teach the next generation coming up, right, it's going to be the cycle just continuing over and over and over. And this is not something that teachers can teach kids in school. And well, Lord alone knows now when kids will get to go back to school physically because of COVID. So there is no kind of social, physical interaction with kids for them to learn and say, I mean, I don't want kids to have the experience that I did at school, but it teaches you that that cycle needs to be broken. So sometimes a good comes out of a bad.
Yeah.
Right. And it's something that I mean, listening to Ruth and Maxine and Annalie, for me, it just clicked that it needs to start really with us and at home before we look at a mass change across Barbados or Trinidad or Guyana, or wherever it may be.
You know, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that happened in South Africa going back some time ago was so painful. And, you know, when you watch back and read back and you see all of the tears that was shed because of the legacy of all the pain and trauma, you get to realize why sometimes people don't want to have these conversations. Yeah. But the truth is, that is where we are as a Caribbean. And we have been there for some time, but just sitting silently.
Yeah.
You know, we have to open up this conversation.
So South Africa is an interesting one, Mark, because you know we were talking about, or Annalie introduced the term voluntary social apartheid, whereas in South Africa it was institutionalized. It was very much the system said you will be separate. So I'm wondering if in that context it seemed almost a bit more tangible to have the conversation, because there was a system that people could point at and say that's the thing that we need to unpick. Whereas in the Caribbean, it's almost the system is a bit more virtual and distributed and has a runtime inside each of our hearts and minds. And therefore it becomes really hard to unpick as a singularity.
I think the runtime point is a good point, because it was the same thing. My screen track again. It was the same thing. It's just
that, for me.
Sorry, Sunday.
That's right.
And my walls are not soundproof.
I want
Mr. That ice cream being made in Guyana. You all know that, right?
Yes, it's made here.
All right.
That's one of my husband's jobs. Chef at ice cream made.
Oh, is it? Don't mention Chefette to Beijing at this point in time. Beijing. I think they're already in line right now in Barbados.
He's with Philip with the ramen raisin, though.
I again tomorrow.
My favorite.
They open tomorrow, so all hell will break loose tomorrow.
People in line. But I think Phil, to your point, the time scale, I think it was the same thing, but its time has elapsed. So therefore, folks don't feel, they might not feel the need, or as you say, they don't see how tangible it was, to hold on to resolve. But the thing that we always talk about, three of us, when we get together, is that the issues and stuff that came up with it, just like in South Africa, even if you want to relate it even to Holocaust and that kind of stuff, the issues are still with us today. in the psyches of both Black and white and Indo people as well. They're still there and they're still real. So I feel sometimes, while you're right, I think sometimes people hide behind that and use it a bit of as an excuse, really, not to have the hard discussion.
I think that even in having the discussion, we have a lot of we remind ourselves of the negative things, and we don't talk too much about, well, okay, as a result, people might say, what good came out of slavery? Well, there were 6 different kinds of people that ended up in Guyana. And each of them brought with them different cultures, which we can use to enhance this country. But instead, what we looked at is that this one suffered and this one didn't. And, you know, and so we keep playing on that. And I'm not saying by any chance, by any stretch of the imagination, that we need to de-emphasize, you know, to overlook what happened to the slaves. But other races suffer too. You know, it was a couple, I think it was last year during our anniversary, church anniversary, the pastor came up with an idea that we should pray for the different races. And that's while we were going through all this post-election story. So he said, we need to. And so I thought, he said, organize it. So get different people to pray for the different races. And I set out not getting a Black person to pray for the Blacks and stuff, just mix them up. And I thought, let me do my own research just in case somebody drops out. So I prepared little prayers for every race, you know, and had it there. And in my research, it's then that I became very aware of some of the suffering of the Chinese. You know, yeah, they were paid and whatever, but they suffered. They were moved from where, and they came here and they suffered the climate, you know, all the diseases and whatever. And you started to see all these things, which generally in history, I wasn't taught. These little nuances I didn't know. What I thought is they came here, they got money. They worked for money, but the slaves didn't work for any money. You know, so until all of these things are brought to bear, that everybody suffered. And yes, some more than some, but everybody suffered. But what's the good? 6 races ended up in this country. And now we have an opportunity to blend all that culture and to make this a really rich place. Not only the oil, but to make it culturally rich. And we are not doing that.
I love what you're
at each other's throats with, you know, with things gone back. Only this morning we looked at the scripture. Sorry, it's not a religious thing, but we looked at the scripture that asks us not to look back. Behind there, it's pain and suffering. And in our own individual lives, right? Even outside of race things. Some of us went through hell with different things, whether it be marriages, boyfriend, whatever, children, whatever. So what are you looking back for? There is a forward movement that says we're not disregarding your pain, but let's see how we could use those experiences to not create a similar situation, because all we're doing is perpetuating the same mistakes with different governments over and over. So you are in power, so the rest of them suffer. So you are in power, so the rest of them suffer. And we keep doing that over and over again in our little corners. And I think we need to move from that and understand that we have a really rich place here. I mean, and we don't just put on that show for Carrie Festa. Carrie Festa, you jump up, everybody in costume looking all happy, and then Carrie Festa is over, and then internet starts, Facebook starts.
Wow. I like the stuff you're saying there, but there's always something that makes me a little bit uncomfortable, is when people say, don't look back, right? And I like that as well. I like not staying in the past and living in the past. But I think we need to accept that yesterday's atrocities are today's wisdom, right? Yeah. And we can walk backwards into the future, in that we can look back and say, okay, we know what has happened. Because earlier we were talking about we need systems in place to create equity, among different races and classes as well. And how can we define what equity looks like without understanding the journey that has brought us to where we are?
How we got the inequity today.
How we got the inequity in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah, Philip, let me just say something. When I say don't look back, I'm saying, yes, we look back to learn where we came from and the mistakes we made, but we don't stay there because we keep reliving this in such a way that we relive it negatively, but not to learn. Yeah.
So it's how you look back is what you're saying.
It's how you look back at that information. What is it that we're learning from that information that we don't want to repeat now? And like I said, don't let us disregard that. It happened. It's there in history. It happened. But what can we do with that? What can we do with that now to move forward?
For that to happen, like Annalie was saying with her conversations, it needs everybody willing to look back.
To do that.
And not just look back. It needs everybody willing to honestly look back.
Look back.
And to understand.
And to honestly understand and accept that what is being propagated today was the building blocks of things that were happening in the past. And be willing, once you take that honest look in the back and understand, and then be willing then to build something new. Recognizing, as Annalie had said, as Ruth has said, as Naz and everyone has said, is that recognizing that putting everyone on an equal footing in the rich cultures that we have in the region will redound to the benefit of everybody.
Everybody, yeah.
I mean, I wanted to add a kind of a gendered perspective to this because,
go ahead.
If we look at some of the laws, for example, there was white women's wombs were really being policed as procreators of the white race. Okay, there was something in Barbados called the Poor Relief Fund. And the Poor Relief Fund was set up by these vestries where they would give money to poor white people. Because, of course, when indentured servants moved off of the plantation, when the transatlantic slave trade happened, they were, living in very kind of, very impoverished kinds of situations. And this created a problem for the white planter class, because here were these poor white people that were referred to as idle and lazy and drunk and savages. But there was this idea about white supremacy. So how are we going to balance these two things? And the Poor Relief Fund had a kind of a moral code around it. So if you were a white woman and had a relationship with a black man, or you had a biracial child, you were struck from the Poor Relief Fund because you needed to conform to these notions of trying to maintain a white class. And so I think we do need to also understand how that continues to affect us today. And why is it that sometimes, people that are crossing boundaries of love are not welcomed within their families? I mean, that still happens in 2021, where there's people there. I mean, you're finding, I think, more interracial marriages, but there is still some kind of unease about it, because I think the colonial project was a lot about notions of purity. And we still, you hear people talking about clear skin and light skin and brown skin and all this kind of nonsense. I mean, when I taught at BCC, I could see that some of the students were still dealing with these issues of shame, of not accepting who they are. And I you can also see it in this kind of obsession with family trees that very easily leave out all of the illegitimacy. There's this obsession with like this singular family tree that is pure, but there's not this inclusion of all of the other. I mean, how many planters had children with black women in the village in the case of Barbados, and their offspring were absolutely abandoned emotionally? Who talks about that? Who talks about that? There's this obsession with purity. And, I'm really interested in looking at the breadth of the family trees, because that is what the Caribbean is based on. Purity is not an option. I mean, we espouse it and we talk about it, but it is not an option in the Caribbean.
Mm.
That's an interesting point. I'll give you guys a little bit of a personal story. My grandfather had what's referred to as an outside child by a Black woman in the village. And he acknowledged her and brought her to live with us. So I understand the household I grew up in was my grandfather, his outside Black child, who was only 3 years older than I was, or biracial child, I should say. My dad, my brother, myself, my uncle Richard, who Barbadians would know from his
Richard Holt,
yeah. And at the time, we lived at Sayes Court in Christchurch, which was an agricultural station. Uncle Richard worked for the Ministry of Agriculture, and he shared that house with us. That was provided to him since he was a single man. He had a girlfriend who was, I guess you could determine her Black. Her brother had asthma, and because people burned stuff in the village, he used to come also and stay for long periods with us. So that was our house with assorted dogs and chickens. And Annalie will tell you that somebody brought in. But when grandfather decided to acknowledge this offspring, we were members, long-standing members of the Barbados Yacht Club, and his tradition would be to go there on the afternoon and have afternoon tea. And I found actually, not that I had forgotten this memory, but I found an old notebook or memory or something that I had written down years ago. So we would have been brought down after school to also play there, have tea, do whatever. But we were cautioned not to go over and sit with him because he had his child out of wedlock who was biracial with him on the beach, and he suffered a lot of pushback because of that. And here we are, how many ever? Well, I'm almost 60, so she must be close to 63 or past, and we're still talking about this because what Annalie said is absolutely true. Are there interracial marriages now or relationships? For sure. Still kind of like everybody feeling a little bit uncomfortable when the one person shows up, the one girlfriend, the one boyfriend, the one husband at a birthday party, anniversary celebration. There's there's so I keep saying this, but there's so many layers to this that it's difficult. Talking to a friend the other day, and she is, I think she would consider herself Black, but her sister considers herself white because they are light skinned. She has white friends, and she said one of the issues, just as we talked about, Annalie and I, finding our Caribbean, recognizing our Caribbean identity by moving away and mixing with people from other Caribbean islands. She had the opposite experience. She went to school in America, and she was regarded in America, of course, as Black, whereas she was regarded in Barbados because of social status and other things as white. Very interesting identity crisis, I guess, for this person.
I mean, I just wanted to say quickly about the fickleness of race, because Barbados is the only place where I'm read as white. In Trinidad, I'm seen as red. In Jamaica, I'm brown. When I was at school in the United States, people thought I was Hispanic or Latina. But this is the only place where I'm white. So there's also this fickleness around race, and it is a social construct. And I was raised to think I was right. But then it wasn't until in my 20s I understood the biracial background of my maternal grandmother. So there is this fickleness. So I was confused when I would travel and people didn't see me as what I thought I was, because your identity is who you see yourself as, but also how it's reflected, and other people kind of see you. And there was a schism within that I think says a lot about the fickleness of race and how it can shift in different contexts.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Our kids did a lot of, Vancouver is a place they make a lot of movies and commercials. The kids did a lot of background work. And our oldest daughter is what they call ethnically ambiguous. So that means she actually she looks more like Annalie's daughter than my daughter. She has olive colored skin, dark hair. It's curly, she and so there are more jobs for ethnically ambiguous people. But our son got a lot of jobs, and he is tall, white, skinny, red hair. And I used to, when you get the briefs as to who they're looking for a commercial, you've never read such a racist piece of documentation, because they're very clear who they want, because they want to make sure that all races are represented. So their brand looks inclusive, but when they describe the people, it's not in a way that would make you feel inclusive in any shape or form. And so Ted used to get the jobs as the tall white kid with glasses, right? And it's just like Annalie says, is like, it's how people regard you. Chris is a Geordie from Northern England, and yet his skin's darker than mine. You know,
and that's quite interesting, because there's a history about the north of England, especially places like Liverpool and Newcastle, as to why their skin is so dark as well. So I come across, which is it's interesting.
There's an interesting question there, Annalie. And I know you saw that and smiled.
Well, I have been using the term white Creole, which is problematic, I know, in a lot of ways. But I think about Creolization in the way that Edouard Glissant, the French Caribbean philosopher, speaks about it, as this kind of constant becoming. And, in some ways, it's also a way to distance myself from what feels to be the problematics of a white Bajan milieu, and to acknowledge the impurity of, or what is seen as the impurity of, the family trees. So it's this, I think it's this negotiation and contestation of notions of being pure, ideas about being pure that I think are really problematic. So I have been using the term white Creole, and I learned about that word from my father, because that's a term that you use to describe horses that are born in the Caribbean. And that's where I first heard about it as a very young child, and then I started to learn more about it as an artist. That's Spooge in the background. Hello, Spooge. But that is the term that I'm using and working through, and it's imperfect, but that is the term that I have been kind of wrapping my head around.
Wow, this is really interesting. I mean,
also to sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Naz. I was coming to you as well, but you go ahead.
No, I was going to say that, I moved from Trinidad to Antigua, right? And I think my eyes opened a little bit more about racism that happens within the Caribbean and towards our own people. Because in Antigua, first off, people see me as East Indian, and they see me with the hijab, and they think that I'm at medical school. I mean, I've told you guys this.
Yes.
They think that I'm Indian or Pakistani attending medical school here. And then, I have a lot of local Antiguan friends. So if I go out with them and I look like this, I've had questions asked to me, why are you liming with these people for? And I'm like, but they're my friends. And they're like, but don't you have your own community in which to lime with, or your own people? I'm like, what is my own people? I am West Indian. And they'll be like, you're West Indian? And I'm like, yeah. They'll be like, you sure you're from here? I'm like, yo, I'm from Trinidad, And then when I start to talk, and they'd be like, oh yeah, you really sound Trini.
You're definitely Trini.
And yeah. So when I see it like that, then I don't have the experiences of being Afro-Trinidadian or Afro-Caribbean, right? But then I also have this experience where they try to clump you based on your skin color or your ethnicity, to say that you have to be religion, yes, because they'll be like, oh, well, I didn't know you can go out on Lyman. I'm like, yo, I'm from the Caribbean. I do everything. Right?
Y'all invite laymen.
Exactly. And so, I mean, the thing about it is that I get it anywhere I go in the Caribbean, because, I mean, obviously because of my job, right? So anywhere I go, like when I go to Barbados and I go down to Oystons, everybody goes to the fish fry. Yes, I go there, but I go by grannies. So when they see me with my hijab, with my and they be like,
gizzards, man,
and they be like, "Will you know about this?" I'm like, "What do you mean? Why know about this, though? I mean, I'm West Indian, and so I from that aspect, I get where it is, and it. Let me tell you, it grates every nerve that I have in my body, that I can't do more than what I'm doing already to get a conversation going and to get the wheels moving for this change. But I mean, I'm glad that now that I've made contact with Ruth and Maxine, and well, obviously the three of you up there, but we're waiting for you all to come down here to have some kind of lime or something like that.
Indeed.
So vaccinate quickly and come down.
But, you know, Naz, I just wanted to say that made me think about, you know, I think a stain on Barbados's reputation in the Caribbean and the state's complicity in the kind of exclusive politics that got played out under the former administration and the anti-immigration platform that the Thompson administration entered on, and which included the revision of the policies on legislation, and the way in which immigration officers in Barbados have treated fellow CARICOM nationals at the border, that is a complete ignoring of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. And, you know, and we've seen that has been meted out to both Black and Indo-Guyanese people, even though the Indo-Guyanese come in for a special kind of treatment because they stand out more clearly in Barbados as minorities. But what happened under that administration, and literally picking up people at bus stops at 5 a.m.
I know that.
In nightclubs, going into their houses and literally just taking them and putting them on planes.
Shameful.
And this notion, I mean, for me, there is not an idea of an illegal CARICOM national. It is something that makes me so angry that we, at the state level, have allowed that to happen. And there was something called a bounty. Now, a bounty is a word that was used in the 1800s. We had a bounty on the heads of illegal CARICOM nationals where you could call in and say, you know, there's an illegal person living at X address and you would get rewarded for this. I mean, at the state level, we need to have this conversation. I think
that's a Trump. Anyway,
but you know, we did have a national conversation about the removal of the Admiral Nelson statue, which I felt was a mature conversation. And I think that what COVID has done, and that conversation about Nelson, I think that it's possible for us to think about having this conversation facilitated from primary school right up. We need to equip our children and our nation with the capacity to have these conversations about race and class. You know, there's too much at stake, and I think we owe it to ourselves to have, as my niece said, we need like a national therapy session, which includes understanding the history and forming relationships. And I'll end by saying that we need to think about, when we think about decolonization, how do we decolonize shame? How do we decolonize love? How do we think about loving across all of those borders and free ourselves up to have a much fuller human experience by knowing that we have the possibility to communicate and engage with everybody across race and class?
I think it goes back
from. No, I was saying that apart from just having the conversation, that we need also somehow to incorporate it into all those cultural activities that we have. You know, just different exercises. Let some of your English classes address stuff like that. Have kids look into debates that have, so a lot more activity along this line and not just talking, or else we will be back here with our walking sticks 10, 15 years from now, at least me.
Oh my word.
Talking.
Walking stick coming fast for me, Maxine.
I agree with you, Maxine,
about this.
Because we can talk, you got to talk with purpose, right? You got to talk with purpose of wanting to develop some kind of action plan at the policy level, but then also that's going to translate down to the hearts and minds of people.
Right. Yeah, because I think our leaders are kind of scared to touch this because it's so closely linked to party and whatever else.
Yeah, it serves a purpose for them at the moment.
You're talking about votes and whatever and whatever. And again, I come back to what I think I said at the beginning. We need not to hand over this power to decide to other people. It is ours to decide. And so it needs to be translated in the way we not only deal with each other, but even when we go to the polls to vote, we need to vote, to do this with some knowledge as to what is going to happen to this society. How is it going to be separate? How are we going to be separated into our little pockets, or are we going to be brought together? And like I said, a football match and a cricket match wouldn't do it. Right? No. That would be for 5 seconds, 1 hour, 2 hours, a half day, and then we're back. So it has to be deeper. And the baby, the little ones who we think don't understand, they certainly do. Because you see them hugging in the street and they don't care what color. You see them exchanging their little biscuits and sweets and they don't care. They just know that is a nice little boy or girl that I can play with. And need to
No, you can
go ahead. And we need to just ensure that there's the practical and there's a conversation, but there's the practical. Things have to get done.
Yeah, I was gonna say we can't diminish the conversation because the first place Annalie went to when she wanted to institute a change was to a conversation. Because it has to start somewhere. I've been watching the chat here and see how people are commenting about the value of what we are doing. This is a small contribution to what we think is required across our region. Talking, it is very rare you will get people from across the races to sit down, have a conversation. Let's talk it out. But you're right. Where do we go next? And that is one of the questions I wanted to pose back to you, Annalie, because I took particular note about what you said when you had your conversation. You saw the people who turned up that you expected, and the truth is, the truth is, it is the hard to reach people that we need to understand. How do we get to them? How do we take the conversation in those places?
I think that we also need to teach history differently. When I know stories of history teachers at secondary school having children reenacting or reading out, choosing a white child in a class to speak as a Jamaican planter and a black child in a class responding as an enslaved African. I think this is not appropriate. I think we need to depersonalize that, and we need to talk about this, I think, in terms of structure and classism and capitalism and that kind of whole economic structure that we've inherited. I mean, I'm hoping that doing the Let We Talk project under COVID is a little bit challenging. So I'm hoping that we're able to have more of those conversations. And I think it could be interesting to have those conversations in different sectors. So what if we had conversations about race with people working in farming? Because the issue of land and access to land is a real issue in Barbados. I mean, Beckles will tell you that people migrated out for 2 reasons: for education and because they didn't have access to land. How do we think about the lens of race through tourism, through the different sectors, through manufacturing? How do we think about the ways in which we promote Barbados as a tourist, this exotic tourist destination? How do we train people in the National Trust and in these tour companies where people are coming out to old plantation houses that profess a certain kind of colonial nostalgia? How do we change people working in the tourist sector to have these difficult conversations? And you don't just come into St. Nicholas Abbey or Sunbury and you look at, a chair where the planter would put up his legs on a Burmese chair and make a joke that he's having a rum punch after lunch. How do we actually have that conversation? Because as our tourists come in more diverse ways, people want to hear this. People are ready to have these conversations, and we need to step up to the plate and say, okay, let's think about how we're going to market this and how we're going to tell this story, because we're not telling it responsibly. And there is in Barbados, there has been, David Commijon raised it recently when that video came out, that the kind of reparations and race commission that was formed 20 years ago, they need to go back to the drawing board. So I think there are a number of mechanisms that we have. There's syllabus, there's the state's role, there's policy, there's training immigration officers, there's tourism, there's the National Trust. I think there are a lot of mechanisms. And then on our own lives, it's the decisions we make. Where do we hang out? Where do we not hang out? Who do we have to our home? Who do we choose to love? How do we talk to our children? So I think it has to happen, on multiple levels.
And thinking of the nuances in Guyana, there, Maxine, because I mentioned at the very beginning that when we were planning this show for a couple of weeks, both Indo and Black Guyanese, none of them wanted to come on this show. And not because they didn't recognize there was an issue, but because they didn't believe that they didn't want to openly be participating in this discussion, because for them, they believe reprisals are very real and could be very real. In Guyana, how are we able to get this conversation going?
I mean, it has started in pockets, and I think a lot of the young people are the ones doing the talking. They're having that discussion because some of them grew up in situations where they could not relate to other races easily, like the Indians couldn't relate to the Black and vice versa. And so they're having that conversation and kind of pulling the older people out and saying, look, we need to address this. But it can happen in schools. It can happen in churches. For example, in my church, we do a whole lot to educate people and to try and to bring them together and, and sensitize them that, look, this is a real issue. I mean, this morning, I started laughing when my pastor started his conversation, because it related to just this conversation that we are having. So it can happen in a lot of different places. And yes, people are scared because there have been reprisals and there have been and there have, because people still mistrust. We still mistrust a system that we perceive does not embrace fully that there is a problem and it needs to be dealt with in a significant manner, not just not just an odd thing here. You have a forum here and then you write the proceedings and then that's it. Right. So people are, and initially I did say no to Melanie. And then I asked myself, well, why am I saying no? What are the issues? And for me, I decided to come because it's not more about what I wanted, not only what I wanted to say, but I wanted to hear from other people. And connect with other people who have the same interests.
Absolutely.
And to see if there is anything that we can agree on that we can try. And then, we just report each other. I mean, having spoken to Annalie and Ruth and Nash and you guys, I now have 6 other friends that I can call on and see if I can do something positive, starting at my church. I've done that at home. But, just go out and very slowly. There are a lot of youth groups in Guyana that are interested. One point I need to make. There are something I need to ask. Why is it Annalie or anybody else, you think that it's difficult for example, for somebody to listen to an Afro-Guyanese talk about their race in glowing terms, or an Indo-Guyanese talk about their race in glowing terms, without saying something negative. Like it. Let me tell you quickly an experience I had. When I was graduating from Tuskegee, I just before graduation, they brought somebody to talk, to do an inspirational talk. And this was aimed, because it was a predominantly Black institution. They brought the first Black astronaut to speak more specifically to the Blacks to motivate them. And partly because they saw that the numbers were falling apart. And this was a school that had gotten money from the state, etc., etc. So this guy started talking. And as a Caribbean person, where race was not spoke, or you didn't talk directly to one race unless it was elections, I was scooting further and further down in the seat. I almost hit the floor because I was so embarrassed, because to the right and left of me were white guys, my white classmates, and I kept going further and further down. And one of them jabbed me in the rib. He said, "Paris, sit up. He is speaking to you." And if that was a white guy, I would have listened to him. Now sit up, listen to him, and you don't worry about me. I've heard this before. But honestly, and because we don't have those conversations like that in the open, so we need to do that. And there are umpteen opportunities in Guyana. What we need to do is to just do our part. I think when Mark opened, he talked about lending your voice. And then Philip spoke about, when he was talking about his running, that we need to do it steady, committed, and dedicated.
Maxine, take notes.
You and me, we're sisters. I got notes.
Y'all can take some pictures and send them to us after.
You're gonna put Philip running stats on the poster. And now it's Trinidad. The conversations to be had in Trinidad. Tell us what you think.
I mean, I can't speak right now as a Trinidadian living in Trinidad, because obviously I'm not living in Trinidad. But the conversations that I've had with my circle of friends who are living there, and especially what I've seen on Twitter, right? Because there is a huge community of young adults on Twitter that are really the progressives to drive this type of conversation forward. It is something that, and even in the older generations, I must admit, is something that, especially what happened at election times, it really opened a can of worms that people said, we really need to address this now. There are obviously still the traditionalists that would say, but that's just how we are. Right? And want to sweep it away. But I must say that there has been continuous conversation, at least with the group of friends that I have. And I mean, it's a fairly wide circle and a very cross-sectional circle across Trinidad. Because you have people like Annalie who are creative in the creative arts. You have, doctors, lawyers, you have athletes, everybody. They're all getting involved in it. And I can speak from myself, from my teammates. I mean, you've seen what we have done since last year when the Black Lives Matter movement happened, and we've continued that. It's not something that we're letting our feet off the gas with. And it's something that we, in my generation and the generation after me, I know that it's something that really got started last year. And so far, I can say openly that it's not something that has stopped. It might have just slowed down, but it's not stopped in some circles and in some areas. So hopefully, they take it forward. in Antigua here, I don't really see much, of a conversation happening. Because as well, maybe it's just the fact that I guess because of work and because of COVID, I'm not really mixing outside to know what is happening. But that being said, I know Trinidad has taken stock of what happened last year, and I'm hoping and I'm hopeful that we start to see some change so that 5 years down the road, when it's the next elections, we don't have this same bacchanal that happened last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. And Ruth, we're coming to an end. We're closing. You're from outside. You've had a lens that you can look back at Barbados and the wider Caribbean as well, because it's obviously we don't just keep it to one country. What are your final thoughts on how we can move this conversation around, race and race relations within the Caribbean? What are your final thoughts on that? How we can move it forward?
Well, I think predominantly I have hope that's the most important thing. I feel like more of these conversations will happen as people like Annalee institute their programs, as people like Maxine are able to move into community with an intent. And I think that Naz is just number one fan. I think where she takes up space in the Caribbean voice is amazing. So I do have some hope. I have some hope moving forward. I think one thing that's probably a whole topic for another show is accountability, personal accountability, but government accountability. And I think Maxine alluded to it when she said, we vote these people in and we change governments and we expect something different and better from the next and the next and the next. I think that tends to be also a very colonial attitude where you vote in a government and you leave it up to them to deal with whatever issues they may be. And we need to step out more. I don't think many would disagree with me that the present government in Barbados was largely elected in the manner that they were because of a very grassroots, social media driven program. And I think that in that they have no official opposition, especially there, that technically we are the opposition. We are the people that voted them, and we need to step up and say, look, these are the conversations that need to happen. And the Nelson situation is a perfect example of that. When they were like, oh yeah, we're going to get around to that, then people got to stand up and say, well, enough already. We've been getting around to this for so long. Move it already. And it happened. So I think as long as that continues, and I think that I do have hope. I have hope for the voices of people like Annalee who are willing to step out, because it's not easy, as we've discussed. For people like us who are in other countries who can step back a bit, and maybe it's not as much risk to open up and say, this is what we think. And I see so much in our people. I really do. I really have hope. I
agree.
This generation, they get a lot of grief, but they're definitely light years ahead of us in so many ways.
I agree. Thanks, conversation. I think that's one of the things that we say that we need to continue to have. And Annalee, you mentioned your conversations as well, and perhaps the COVID season might not have allowed you to have more of them. But I'm wondering though, even as we finish off, there might still be a good opportunity, because one of the things during this season for me is that I've recognized is the amount of stuff I've paid attention to because I had the space to pause, as Prime Minister Motley would say, and how much I was able to consume. Also, even observing Trinidad Carnival, I know this almost got nothing to do with what we're talking about, but observing Trinidad Carnival, I said to keep saying to people, the amount of carnival that I took in, not being in Trinidad, and there actually not being a carnival, has been 10 times more than I've ever taken. And I think sometimes what social media, to use it for good now, has allowed is that you can actually bring these things to the public, and more people who maybe the people who you expected to be there, maybe some of the ones who you don't expect to be there might sneak in on the side and watch on the down low and listen, and that kind of stuff. So I would say there's still that opportunity. Yeah. So I would definitely say try that route. They might not turn up because they don't want to see the face and they don't want to have the uncomfortable, uneasy conversation on the bathroom break. Might look too obvious, but they might watch you on the screen where they can turn off the camera and they might just listen.
Yeah,
and
it's true. Kind of stuff. Yeah, we'll definitely do more. We'll definitely do more of them. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Phil, you wanna any final words to thank the guys for coming on?
Yeah, thanks a lot. There's just one thing that I took away many things from this, but this I'm going to try to sum it up. And the two words are courage and adamant love. And I think we do need courage to look back. I'll come back to the adamant love, Andre.
No, I know.
But courage is we need the courage to look back so that we can talk about the past, to frame where we are properly, to really understand where we are. And once we understand where we are and we have the right language and ways of talking about it with courage and adamant love here I mean is that regardless of when we cast our eyes back and we come back to the present to sort of reverse engineer and construct what it is here, we start at love and we end at love for each other. And then from that position, there is the conversation and there's a communication side, but what's always important for any transformation is behaviors. How do we start to behave and model this future, this collective future that we want with what we have?
Corbin?
Awesome. I'll say three things.
Or Mark, I know you don't want me to call you Corbin. You know, that's
not on the show, man. Come on. We got so far. You even got Ruford Catholic.
You got Ruford.
Only because all the white people are related, and I have to say they're Corbin cousins. So I choose the Mark. I choose the Mark as my cousin.
Go ahead, Mark.
We were thinking to bring that up too, but next conversation.
Look, I'll say three things. We talked about fear and anxiety and how they can often drive a lot of what is stopping these conversations from happening. But I want to honor you guys this afternoon who came and had this conversation with us. 4 courageous women who, you're stepping up. You're recognizing, there's fear and anxiety in the community around uncomfortable conversations. But you know what often happens? When we want to lead change in our community, a lot of times it is the women who step up. And I just wanna honor you ladies for stepping up and having this conversation. And we talk about personal decisions. Important, because ultimately a lot of this comes down to us, what we're doing in our homes, the conversations we're having, and what we're not going to tolerate. And that feels as though that is so important in the season that we are going into. And I like to leave a question. Are we ripe for change? I think somebody mentioned earlier. I think we're starting that journey, and we have to keep continuing to go on that journey. Keep it going.
No, 100%. 100%. I think we definitely are right for change. And as Mark said, I really want to reiterate, thank you, ladies, for joining us. And not just for joining us and not for having a discussion, but in all 4 of you being so open as well. Being so vulnerable to take on, the discussion and relate personal situations and experiences and what's not. We've seen over the years that has not been easy. And sometimes folks have had these conversations, but they keep it at 10,000 feet and not willing to come down to 500 feet, which is where the change will get enacted when we all get personable, and everybody get personal. So I really, really, really want to thank you guys for joining us. And I can see our audience is also saying thank you as well. So guys in the audience, please say thank you to our guests this evening as well. But, it's been a fantastic conversation. Over 2 hours, I didn't even realize that event.
Women talking. Hello.
Caribbean woman.
This is true.
Thanks for saying that, Ruth.
I couldn't say it. I
know it was there. I know it was there.
Oh, by the way, not saying I agree, but
indeed. But ladies,
wait
thank
till
you
I start doing some other stuff, or you got to be doing more than vacuuming.
You're doing the same thing.
But ladies, thank you all. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you in the living room. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for the
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Before we leave, right? I just want to tell you all, I just want to tell you all, I mean, since the last time that I was here, you all got real fancy and technical. We global really move up the place these couple of months that I haven't been on. But, fantastic job as usual. And thank you for having me and having the other ladies here.
Yeah,
thank you, Naz. We always say, whenever we want to boost in ratings, Naz, because
Superstar.
The audience always tell us that. But thank you, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon here in the living room. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. Anytime.
Yeah.
Oh, guys, that was a fantastic conversation.
Special.
Indeed. And I see people in the audience already saying we need to have this conversation from time to time and keep it going.
We do.
Yeah.
This is the second time we've spoken about the race relations, and we will continue because each time we learn more, we go deeper, and we kind of enrich the experience. So absolutely.
Indeed. I saw someone there mention, why didn't we play the video? Phil, you want to take that on?
Put me on the spot. I would say two reasons.
We talk about it, but I just thought, you can say why we didn't.
One, I didn't want it to be the center of the conversation. I think it is when it comes to racism is not an event, and I think we're suffering from event fatigue when we talk about this topic. Racism is a construct, and I think it's more interesting and also more progressive to talk about the construct rather than the events. I'm a systems guy, and if we have a system at work that's sending out a lot of events, we don't just rush after the events and deal with those. We get under the hood of the system and look at the code and see what's causing these events to occur. And I think that's where the more profound discussions arise.
100% agree. Corbin, final words? Oh, sorry,
I felt the conversation was beautiful, and it didn't miss the video actually. So
I didn't
we were able to focus on quite a number of areas and get across the topic quite well and take some learning. And I think there's a lot of learning, certainly for me. I did a lot of listening in the show today because I just wanted to hear how this is playing out amongst different parts of the region. So it was a wonderful experience, and it didn't need the other Corbin's video.
The other. No,
I know Italy.
Man, slow though.
So I went for 8K run today, man.
Yeah. Ooh. A steady run.
Round walk.
A run and chip.
Yeah.
I thought it was a fantastic conversation. And sometimes I think what I really like about it as well is that, and why the video, we decided not to play the video, because sometimes when you come at these things from emotion, in the moment, the conversation goes in a completely different direction. And you don't always get to the meat of the matter, and sometimes have real nuanced discussions as well. And the race conversation within the region is much bigger than just black, white. We heard Annalie talked about other things there as well. We heard Ruth talking about mixed race, and obviously you got Guyana and Indo and Afro-Caribbean, and the same thing in Trinidad. And even we didn't have a Jamaican in, but we saw some people in the comments talking about, it would have been interesting to hear that part. It's, and because obviously the issues of colorism and stuff. But maybe colorism is probably a topic on its own that we should discuss at some point, about how that plays out in the Caribbean,
That's the thoughts on that. Okay, yeah.
You got some thoughts? Oh, that's good. And Alison, I saw your comment. Tiffany, next show, man. Alison, I saw your comment there. You said you study this era, and the next time, who knows? Just as Ruth is in the audience and she's on the screen, you in the audience now, you might be on the screen as well. But everyone, we just want to say thank you. Wilfred, we see you there. Melanie Paris, that's Maxine's sister. Thank you, Melanie.
All right.
Elmi, Mosa, thank you very much. Marcel, as well. Rosman, I always call their names and get myself in trouble. Bernadette, saw you there. Christy Watson, thank you for joining us. Karen Douglas, thank you as usual. Katie Joseph, Karen Reed. We saw I can't call everybody's name because there was so much. Renee Hold, I think that's a new name I haven't seen before.
Let's give a shout to Dave Mayers, who said he joined us for the first time by accident.
For the first time.
Welcome,
I was looking for the name actually, but I couldn't remember who said it. I saw it, yes. But thanks, Dave. Welcome back. And look, as we always ask, these conversations are going to live on. It's not just for the live. Do us a huge favor. If you think that your network would benefit from listening to this conversation, hit share and let's get it out there for as many people to listen to, and join in the conversation in the comments because it's going to live on. Also, if it's the first time here, as Dave was, just join our page on Facebook, like us on YouTube, and we're on Instagram and Twitter as well. We Global Media. And you will get all the different content that we have as well. And just have good Caribbean conversations. That's what we're about. Having good, solid Caribbean conversations, because we believe that we, bringing us closer together. That's what we want to do. So to everyone who's there, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Until next time.
Yeah.
See people saying they want to hear a male conversation.
Male perspective. Yeah, I saw that.